"Never look at him again," the Lakota warrior whispered. Her response left him silent. The wind moved gently across the open land, carrying the smell of wood smoke and fresh earth. The sun had already disappeared behind the wide hills of South Dakota, leaving behind a soft orange glow in the sky. As darkness slowly settled, small lights began to shine around the gathering area. Families arrived in groups, some laughing, some quiet, all dressed with care. The sound of drums began to rise in the distance, steady and deep, like a heartbeat echoing across the plains. Daniel Harper stood near the entrance, adjusting the strap of his camera bag. He had traveled from Chicago 2 days earlier after hearing about the cultural gathering taking place near the Lakota reservation. He was 28 years old, curious and proud of the work he had done as a freelance photographer. His photos had appeared in small magazines and online articles. He believed he was telling important stories through his lens, but as he stepped closer to the circle of people, he felt slightly out of place. Children ran past him, their laughter bright and free. Women in colorful ribbon skirts moved gracefully across the open space, their braids tied neatly with bright ribbons. Elderly men sat in folding chairs, speaking in calm voices as they watched everything around them. The large fire in the center crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. Daniel lifted his camera and began taking photos almost immediately. Click. A group of dancers preparing behind a drum circle. Click. A young boy holding his grandfather's hand. Click. The fire glowing against the darkening sky. He moved carefully but quickly, always searching for the perfect angle. To him, this was a rare opportunity. He wanted to capture something powerful, something real. He told himself he was honoring the culture by showing its beauty to the world. What he did not notice was how some people noticed him. A few elders exchanged quiet glances. A middle-aged woman gently turned her face away when she saw his lens pointing in her direction. Daniel assumed they were shy. He did not stop to ask for permission. In his mind, public events meant public photographs. The drumming grew louder, stronger. The rhythm filled the air and seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Dancers entered the circle, their outfits decorated with beads, feathers, and bright fabric. Their steps were steady and proud. The movements told stories that Daniel did not understand, but deeply wanted to capture. He stepped closer to the fire. That was when he saw her. Was the devil of the room no way? She stood slightly apart from the main crowd, near the edge of the light. The fire reflected in her dark eyes. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, and her ribbon skirt moved gently with the wind. Her beaded earrings shimmered as she turned her head toward the dancers. Her name was Ayana Red Cloud. Daniel didn't know her name yet. He only saw what he believed was a perfect photograph. There was something calm about her. She was not dancing, not speaking. She was watching, observing, as if she carried the stories of everyone around her inside her silence. Daniel slowly raised his camera. He adjusted the focus carefully. The background blurred. The firelight framed her face beautifully. He felt that familiar excitement photographers often feel when they believe they have found something special. Just as his finger prepared to press the shutter, a shadow stepped into his view. A tall man wearing traditional regalia moved between Daniel and the young woman. His movements were steady and controlled. Feathers rested on his shoulders, and his braids were tied neatly down his back. His presence felt strong, like the steady beat of the drum behind him. Daniel lowered the camera slightly, surprised. The man did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. Instead, he leaned slightly toward Aina and spoke in a low whisper. Never look at him again. Daniel could not hear clearly at first, but he understood enough. The message was not meant for him, yet it felt directed at him all the same. His face grew warm. Confusion rushed through him. Had he done something wrong? He had photographed many cultural events before. No one had reacted this way. The warrior's eyes finally met Daniel's. We so happy they were not angry, they were firm. Daniel slowly lowered his camera completely. Around them, the drumming continued. The dancers moved in rhythm, unaware of the small but important moment unfolding near the fire. Ayana did not immediately turn away as the whisper suggested. Instead, she kept her gaze steady. For a brief second, her eyes met Daniel's. He expected to see discomfort. Instead, he saw something else. Disappointment. Not anger. That look unsettled him more than any shouted words could have. Daniel suddenly became aware of the space he was standing in. The fire was not just decoration. The dancers were not just performers. The gathering was not just an event for pictures. It was something living, something meaningful. I'm sorry, he said, unsure if his voice would even be heard over the drums. The warrior did not respond immediately. He simply stood there, tall and steady, as if guarding something invisible but important. Ayana finally shifted her weight and stepped slightly to the side so she could see Daniel more clearly. "Do you know what this gathering is for?" she asked calmly. Her voice was gentle but serious. Daniel hesitated. "It's a cultural celebration," he answered, though his tone made it sound more like a question. She nodded slowly. "It is also a time for remembering, for honoring family, for protecting what is sacred." The word sacred lingered in the air. Daniel felt smaller somehow. His camera, which had always felt like a tool of connection, suddenly felt heavy in his hands. "I didn't mean any disrespect," he said honestly. The warrior finally spoke, his voice deep but controlled. "Intent is not always the same as impact." Daniel swallowed. He had heard similar words during a college lecture once, but they had never felt this real. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks upward. For a moment, all three of them stood in silence. The drumbeat continued, steady and strong, as if reminding everyone that the heart of the gathering had not stopped. Ayana looked back toward the dancers, then she looked at Daniel again. "You see beauty?" she said softly. "But do you see responsibility?" Daniel had no immediate answer. He had come looking for powerful images. He had not come prepared for powerful questions. Around them, children sat near their grandparents. A young girl adjusted her shawl nervously before stepping into the dance circle. An older woman wiped a tear from her eye as she watched. Daniel began noticing details he had overlooked before. This was not just an event. It was survival. It was pride. The warrior stepped slightly back but did not leave. His presence remained protective, steady as the earth beneath them. Daniel slowly lowered his camera strap from around his neck. He held the camera at his side instead. "I want to understand," he said quietly. Ayana studied his face carefully, as if trying to measure whether his words were real or simply polite. "Understanding takes time," she replied. The drumbeat shifted rhythm. The dancers' steps grew faster. Cheers rose from the crowd as a young boy completed his turn in the circle. The moment between them felt unfinished, like a door slightly open but not yet entered. Daniel knew something important had just happened. The whisper he was never meant to hear echoed in his mind. Never look at him again. He realized it was not just about him as a person. It was about what he represented. An outsider with a camera, able to take images and leave. For the first time since arriving, Daniel did not lift his camera again. Instead, he simply watched it, with his own eyes. And as the fire continued to burn under the wide South Dakota sky, he began to sense that this night would change him in ways he could not yet fully understand. The drums continued long after that moment near the fire, but something inside Daniel had gone quiet. He stood at the edge of the gathering, holding his camera at his side instead of in front of his face. The rhythm that once excited him now felt like a reminder. Each beat seemed to ask him a question he did not yet know how to answer. Ayana had stepped back toward her family after speaking to him. The tall warrior remained nearby, watchful but calm. Daniel did not try to take another photo. Instead, he observed in a different way. He noticed how people greeted each other, how elders were approached with respect, how children listened when stories were told. He began to understand that this was not simply a public event. It was a living connection between generations. As the evening slowly came to an end, families began packing chairs and folding blankets. The fire burned lower, glowing softly instead of roaring. Daniel debated whether he should leave quietly or try to speak again. He felt embarrassed, but also strangely determined. Finally gathering his courage, he walked toward Ayana. She was helping an elderly woman wrap a shawl around her shoulders. Her movements were careful and patient. When she finished, she turned and saw Daniel standing a few steps away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I wanted to say thank you," Daniel began, "for telling me the truth." Ayana studied him again, just as she had earlier. "Truth is not always easy to hear," she replied. "I know," he admitted. "I think I've been seeing things only from my side." The wind picked up slightly, moving her hair across her shoulder. The tall warrior was no longer standing directly beside her, but Daniel could feel that he was still somewhere nearby. "Why did you come here?" she asked. Daniel answered honestly. "I heard about the gathering. I wanted to capture something meaningful, something people in the city don't usually see." "And what do people in the city usually see?" she asked. He paused. "Sometimes only stereotypes, or old images from history books. And you thought a photo could fix that?" He hesitated again. "I thought it could help." She did not smile, but her expression softened just a little. "Helping begins with listening." Daniel looked down at his camera. It suddenly felt like a symbol of everything he had done. without thinking deeply enough. My grandmother used to say, Ayana continued, that stories are alive. When you carry them, you carry responsibility. If someone shares their story with you, it is a gift, and you do not treat a gift carelessly. Daniel listened carefully. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. I didn't ask before taking photos, he admitted. I should have. You should have. There was no anger in her voice, only honesty. The night grew colder. Some people had already left, but a few small groups remained, talking quietly. Daniel realized he did not want to leave yet. Not like this. Would it be all right, he asked slowly, if I stayed for a few more days? Without photographing anything? Just to learn. Ayana raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised by the question. Learning is not tourism, she said. It takes patience. I can be patient, he replied. She studied him again, searching for signs of pride or performance. What she saw instead was uncertainty. And something else. Humility, maybe? You can come to the community center tomorrow morning, she said finally. There's a language class for children. You can sit in the back and observe. No camera. Daniel nodded quickly. No camera. The next morning, he arrived early. The community center was a simple building with worn wooden floors and bright posters on the walls. Children's drawings were taped near the entrance. He left his camera locked inside his car. Inside, about 10 children sat in a circle while an elderly man spoke softly in the Lakota language. The sounds were unfamiliar to Daniel, but they carried a musical quality. The children repeated the words carefully, sometimes giggling when they mispronounced them. Ayana sat beside the elder, helping the younger children follow along. Daniel took a seat against the wall, exactly where she had told him to sit. He kept his hands folded in his lap. He noticed how patient the elder was. When a child struggled with a word, he did not correct harshly. He simply repeated it gently until the child felt confident. Daniel felt something shift inside him again. These were not scenes for dramatic photographs. They were quiet acts of preservation. The language itself felt precious, like something being carefully protected. After the class ended, Ayana walked over to him. What did you see? She asked. He thought carefully before answering. I saw pride, and effort, and care. Language carries memory. When words disappear, pieces of history disappear too. Daniel had never thought about language that way. In a city, language is blended and mixed. He had taken that for granted. Over the next few days, Daniel returned to the community center. He helped move chairs. He carried boxes. He listened to elders share stories about winters long ago, about traditions passed down quietly through families. He did not record anything. He did not photograph anything. One afternoon, he found himself sitting beneath a large cottonwood tree near the edge of the reservation. Ayana joined him, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. This tree is older than both of us, she said, handing him a cup. My grandfather used to sit here and tell me stories, and Daniel looked up at its wide branches stretching into the sky. What kind of stories? He asked. Stories about resilience, she replied, about holding on to identity even when the world tries to reshape you. Outsiders have come here for generations, she continued. Some came with good intentions. Some came only to take pictures, research, stories, and then they left. Daniel understood the message clearly. I don't want to be someone who just takes, he said quietly. Then don't, she replied. Her answer was simple, direct. That evening, the tall warrior approached Daniel for the first time since the gathering. You stayed, the warrior said calmly. Yes, Daniel replied. Why? Because I realized I didn't understand, and I don't want to leave without understanding. The warrior studied him for a long moment. The silence was not uncomfortable this time. It felt like a test. Respect is shown through action, the warrior finally said. Daniel nodded. The following day, Daniel was invited to help prepare for another small gathering. He helped set up tables and sweep the open space near the fire pit. No one asked him to, but he volunteered. As the sun began to set again, he stood near the same fire from that first night, but everything felt different now. He was not scanning for the perfect shot. He was not searching for dramatic light. He was simply present. Ayana walked up beside him. You are quieter now, she observed. I think I needed to be, he admitted. She gave a small smile, the first he had seen from her. Good, she said. Listening is stronger than speaking sometimes. Daniel watched as families gathered once more. This time, when a young boy ran past him, he smiled instead of reaching for his camera. When an elder nodded at him, he nodded back respectfully. The tall warrior stood across the fire, watching again. There was no whisper this time. only the steady beat of the drum and the quiet understanding growing between them. Daniel realized something important that evening. A photograph could capture a moment, but it could not capture responsibility. That had to be carried in the heart. And for the first time since arriving, he felt like he was beginning to see, not just with his eyes, but with awareness. The lesson was not finished, but it had truly begun. By the fourth day, Daniel no longer felt like a visitor who was passing through. He still knew he was an outsider, but he no longer moved with the restless energy he had arrived with. His mornings began early now. Instead of checking his camera equipment first, he stepped outside to feel the cool air and watch the sun rise slowly over the open land. The sky seemed larger here than anywhere he had lived before. In the city, tall buildings cut the horizon into pieces. Here, nothing blocked the view. The land stretched wide and quiet, as if it had time to breathe. Daniel had left his camera inside his car since the language class. Each day that passed without using it felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable. Photography had always been his way of connecting with the world. Without it, he felt unsure of who he was. But slowly, he began to realize that maybe he had depended on it too much. That afternoon, Ayana invited him to sit with a small group of elders outside the community center. They were seated in a loose circle, some in folding chairs, others on blankets spread over the grass. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure if he truly belonged there. Ayana noticed his hesitation. "It's okay," she said softly. "Just listen." He nodded and took a seat slightly behind the circle, making sure not to interrupt. One of the elders, a man with silver hair braided neatly down his back, began speaking in Lakota. His voice was steady, rich, with emotion. After a few minutes, Ayana quietly translated parts of the story into English for Daniel. "He's speaking about his grandfather," she whispered. "About a winter when food was scarce and the community had to rely on each other more than ever." Daniel listened closely. The elder's hands moved gently as he spoke, as if shaping the memories in the air. Even without understanding every word, Daniel could feel the weight of the story. Another elder added to the conversation, speaking about boarding schools from long ago and how children were separated from their families. His voice did not rise with anger. It carried something else. Strength, maybe even forgiveness. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had read about these things in history books, but hearing them from someone who had lived through it felt different. It was not just history. It was personal. He kept his hand still down. After the stories ended, the group sat in silence for a while. The wind moved softly through the grass. No one rushed to fill the quiet. Later, as people began standing and stretching, the silver-haired elder looked directly at Daniel. "You are the photographer," he said calmly. "Yes," he replied. "I was." The elder smiled gently. "And now?" Daniel took a breath. "Now I am learning." A small laugh moved through the group, not mocking, but warm. "Good," the elder said. "Learning is a strong beginning." The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. "You didn't reach for your camera today," Ayana observed. "I wanted to," he admitted. "The stories were powerful." "And why didn't you?" she asked. "Because I'm starting to understand that not every powerful moment belongs in a frame." Ayana nodded slowly. Some moments are meant to live only in memory. They sat beneath the wide branches of the tree. Daniel traced the rough bark with his fingers. "In the city," he said, "everything feels fast. If you don't capture something immediately, it feels like you lose it." "And here?" she asked. "Here, it feels like things are meant to stay, even without proof." Ayana smiled faintly. Our stories were carried long before cameras existed. The next morning, Daniel surprised himself. He returned to his car, opened the trunk, and removed his camera bag. For a moment he stared at it. The familiar weight in his hands brought back confidence, but also discomfort. He carried the bag back toward the community center, not to use it, but to show Ayana something. When he found her inside, organizing books on a shelf, he set the bag down gently. "I want you to see what I've taken," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because if I've misunderstood something, I need to know." They sat at a small wooden table. Daniel turned on his camera and scrolled through the images from the first night. The dancers, the fire, the faces he had captured without permission. Ayana leaned closer, studying each photo quietly. Some images were beautiful, the lighting was dramatic. The colors were rich, but as Daniel looked at them now, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Distance. The photos felt separate from the people in them. They showed movement, but not meaning. Ayana stopped at the photo he had almost taken of her before the warrior stepped in. "You didn't capture this one," she said. "No," he replied. Why? Because I was stopped. She looked at him. And now? Now I think it would have been incomplete. Incomplete? She repeated. I would have shown your face, he said slowly, but not your voice. Not your thoughts? Not your story? Ayana sat back slightly. That is true. He scrolled through more images, noticing how he had focused on dramatic angles instead of relationships. I had framed people as subjects, not as participants in their own narratives. I think I was chasing impact, he admitted, not connection. That is common, she said gently. Impact impresses strangers. Connection builds trust. Her words settled deeply inside him. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached the tall warrior for the first time on his own. The man was adjusting his regalia near the open field where children were practicing dance steps. May I speak with you? Daniel asked, respectfully. The warrior studied him, then nodded. I've been thinking about what you said that night, Daniel began. The whisper. The warrior's expression remained steady. It was not meant to harm you. I know that now, Daniel said. It was meant to protect. The warrior nodded once. Protection is part of our duty. Daniel looked down briefly. Thank you for it. You are different from when you arrived, the warrior observed. I feel different, Daniel admitted. The warrior's eyes moved toward the children dancing nearby. Change is shown over time. Daniel understood. Words alone were not enough. That evening, a small community meal was held inside the center. Long tables were arranged with homemade dishes. Families shared food and laughter. Daniel helped carry trays and refill water pitchers. At one point, a young boy tugged on his sleeve. Are you the camera guy? The boy asked curiously. Daniel smiled. I was. Why don't you take pictures anymore? The boy asked. Daniel knelt down slightly so they were at eye level. Because sometimes it's better to just be here. Then he nodded and ran back to his friends. As the night continued, Daniel felt something new growing inside him. It wasn't excitement like he felt when chasing a great photo. It was steadiness. He realized that the lesson was not about putting away his camera forever. It was about understanding when to use it and why. Under the soft indoor lights, surrounded by conversations and laughter, Daniel understood that true storytelling required permission, patience, and partnership. He was no longer chasing images. He was building relationships. And though he knew he still had much to learn, he also knew that the silence from that first night, the silence after the whisper, had become one of the most important teachers of his life. By the end of the week, the land no longer felt unfamiliar to Daniel. The wide sky, the steady wind, the quiet mornings, all of it had started to feel comforting instead of distant. He had stopped counting the days. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about deadlines, social media posts, or exhibition plans. He was thinking about people. On his last evening before returning to the city, another gathering was planned near the same fire pit where everything had begun. This time it was smaller, more intimate. Families brought simple dishes to share. Children ran in circles while elders arranged their chairs carefully. Daniel stood beside his car for a long moment before walking toward the fire. In his hands, he carried something different. Not his camera hanging around his neck, but a small stack of printed photographs. The day before, he had driven to the nearest town with a printing shop. He selected only a few images from the first night and the days after, ones that he now felt were respectful and meaningful. He had carefully chosen photos that showed joy, connection, and everyday strength. He did not choose dramatic close-ups or moments taken without awareness. On the back of each photograph, he had written a short note by hand. As the sky slowly turned orange and purple, he approached the gathering. Some people noticed him and nodded politely. A few children waved. He waved back. Ayana was kneeling near the fire, helping her grandmother adjust a blanket over her legs. When she looked up and saw Daniel holding the stack of prints, her expression shifted slightly, curious but calm. You're leaving tomorrow, she said as he walked closer. Yes, he replied quietly. But before I go, I wanted to return something. Return, she repeated. He nodded. Display. The images. The tall warrior stood a few steps away, speaking with another man. His eyes briefly moved toward Daniel, watchful as always. Daniel took a slow breath. His heart was beating faster than he expected. He realized that this moment felt more important than any gallery opening he had ever attended. He approached the first family, a mother and her 2 daughters who had danced on the first night. Gently, he handed the mother a printed photo. I took this at the gathering, he said respectfully. I should have asked first. I'm sorry for that, but I wanted you to have it. The mother looked surprised. She studied the image carefully. It showed her daughters laughing together, their shawls lifted slightly by the wind as they danced. Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel felt something warm rise in his chest. Not pride, but relief. One by one, he walked to others, to the elder who had spoken under the cottonwood tree, to the young boy who had asked about the camera, to a grandfather who had watched the dancers with tears in his eyes. Each time he offered the photo first before saying anything else. Some people smiled. Some simply nodded. A few asked questions about how the photo was taken. Daniel answered honestly and simply. When he finally reached Ayanna, only one photograph remained in his hands. She stood as he approached. "This one is yours," he said softly. She accepted it but did not look at it immediately. Instead, she studied his face. "May I?" she asked, holding the photo up slightly. She turned it over in her hands. The image was from the first evening, not the one he had almost taken before the whisper, but one captured later from a respectful distance. It showed her standing near the fire, her face lit by the glow, her expression thoughtful as she watched the dancers. On the back, Daniel had written, "Thank you for teaching me how to see." The fire cracked behind them. Voices and laughter floated through the air, but the space between them felt still. "You did not post these?" she asked. "No," Daniel said. "They belong here first." She looked at him carefully, as if measuring the truth of his words. "And after?" she asked. "After," he said thoughtfully, "I would only share what people are comfortable with context. With your voices included." Ayanna nodded slowly. Behind her, the tall warrior stepped forward. His presence was steady, just as it had been that first night. Daniel felt the familiar tension rise in his chest, but it was softer now. The warrior looked at the photograph in Ayanna's hands. Then he looked at Daniel. "You listened," the warrior said. "I tried to," Daniel replied. The warrior's eyes held his for a long moment. There was no challenge in them now, only evaluation. "Finally!" The warrior gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod. The gesture felt heavier than applause. Ayanna turned back to Daniel. "That first night," she said, "when he whispered to me, it was not about you as a person." "I know," Daniel replied quietly. "It was about protecting dignity," she continued. "For many years, our images were taken without care. People saw feathers and fire, but not families. They saw tradition, but not everyday life." Daniel swallowed. He understood more clearly now. "I don't want to be part of that pattern," he said. "Then don't be," she answered gently. There was strength in her voice, but also acceptance. As the evening continued, Daniel stayed near the fire without feeling like an outsider standing at the edge. A young boy sat beside him and pointed at the stars beginning to appear. "Do you have stars like this in the city?" the boy asked. "Not like these," Daniel admitted with a smile. Music began again, softer than the first night, but steady and warm. A few people stood and began to dance casually, not in formal regalia, but simply enjoying the moment. Daniel did not reach for a camera that wasn't there. Instead, he let the sounds and sights settle into his memory. At one point, Ayanna sat beside him on a fallen log near the fire. "You look different," she said quietly. "How?" he asked. "Less hurried." He laughed softly. "I think I was always chasing something. And now? Now I think I understand that some things are not meant to be chased." She watched the flames for a moment. "Strength is not loud," she said. "Sometimes it is patient." He nodded. After a while, the tall warrior approached once more. This time, he sat across from them, not as a guard, but as part of the circle. The silence between the three of them felt natural now. Daniel finally spoke. "When you whispered that night," he said carefully, "it stopped me. I didn't understand it at first, but I'm grateful." The warrior studied the fire before responding. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "silence teaches more than words." Daniel felt those words settle deeply inside him. As the gathering slowly came to an end, families began to say their goodbyes. Children grew sleepy. The fire burned lower, glowing softly against the dark sky. Daniel stood and brushed dust from his jeans. Tomorrow he would drive back to the city, back to noise, deadlines, and familiar streets. But he knew he would not return as the same person who had arrived. Before leaving the fire for the night, he turned to Ayanna. "I don't know how to thank you properly," he said. She held the photograph gently in her hands. "You already did," she replied. The tall warrior remained silent, watching the last sparks rise into the night sky. And in that silence, Daniel understood something important. Respect was not proven through speeches or promises. It was shown through action, through patience, and through the willingness to change. The whisper from that first night no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a beginning. The morning Daniel left was quiet and cold. A thin layer of mist rested over the open land, and the sky was pale with early light. He placed his bag carefully in the trunk of his car, moving slower than usual, as if stretching out the last few minutes. The air smelled like grass and distant wood smoke. Before getting into the driver's seat, he looked once more toward the cottonwood tree in the distance. It stood tall and steady, just as it had every day he had been there. He felt grateful for its silent presence. Ayanna and her grandmother had come to say goodbye. The tall warrior stood a few steps behind them, calm and watchful, though his expression was softer now. "You will come back?" Ayanna asked. "Yes," Daniel said honestly, "if I am invited." "Invitation is earned," he smiled slightly. "Then I will earn it." Her grandmother reached forward and placed her hand briefly over his. "Travel safely," she said in a warm voice. The tall warrior stepped closer. For a moment, Daniel wondered if there would be more words, another test, another quiet challenge. Instead, the warrior extended his hand. Daniel shook it firmly. "Remember what you learned," the warrior said. "I will," Daniel replied, and this time he meant it without hesitation. The drive back to the city felt longer than usual. The wide-open plains slowly gave way to highways, traffic signs, and crowded streets. The sky seemed smaller again. Buildings blocked the horizon. Noise replaced wind. When Daniel reached his apartment, everything looked the same as it had before he left. His desk covered with notebooks, framed prints on the wall, camera equipment neatly arranged, but something inside him had shifted. He unpacked quietly and sat down at his desk. The first thing he did was open his laptop. His social media accounts were full of messages asking about his recent trip. "Can't wait to see the photos. Did you get amazing shots? Post something soon?" He stared at the screen for a long moment. Instead of uploading dramatic images, he began writing. He wrote about listening, about responsibility, about how stories belong to people first before they belong to an audience. He explained that photography is not only about capturing beauty, but about honoring context. He did not name the community or share details without permission. He simply shared what he had learned about slowing down and asking first. When he finally selected photos to share publicly, he chose carefully. He emailed Ayanna beforehand, attaching the images and asking for her thoughts. Her reply came the next day. "These are respectful," she wrote. "Thank you for asking." That simple sentence meant more to him than any number of likes or comments. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began planning his next exhibition, but this time he approached it differently. Instead of designing large, dramatic prints without explanation, he decided to include written reflections beside each photograph. He titled the exhibit, "Learning to See." At the entrance, instead of a bold artistic statement, he placed a simple message. Every story carries responsibility. He printed that sentence in clear, simple letters. When the exhibition opened, many visitors expected powerful visuals, and they found them. But they also found something else. Context. Descriptions written with care. Reflections about listening before photographing. Notes about permission and partnership. Some visitors seemed surprised by the honesty in his writing. One woman approached him during the opening night. "This feels different from your earlier work," she said. "It is," Daniel replied. "How?" He paused before answering. "I used to focus on what looked powerful. Now I try to focus on what feels truthful." The exhibition received attention online, but what mattered most to Daniel was not the praise. It was the quiet knowledge that he had not taken something that did not belong to him. Months later, Daniel kept his promise and returned to the reservation. Not with a rushed schedule, but with time set aside. He emailed first, asking if it was appropriate to visit. Ayanna responded with a short message. "You are welcome." When he arrived, he was greeted not as a stranger, but as someone familiar. Children remembered him as the camera guy who stopped using his camera. The nickname made him laugh. This time, he brought small printed books from his exhibition. He handed them out personally to the families whose images were included. "These are yours, too," he said each time. He spent the week helping again, moving chairs, setting up tables, assisting with small tasks. He still carried his camera sometimes, but it stayed in his bag unless someone specifically invited him to use it. One afternoon under the cottonwood tree, Ayanna joined him again. "You kept your word," she said. "I told you I would," he replied. She looked at him thoughtfully. "Most people don't come back." I'm not most people anymore, he said gently. She smiled at that. As they sat in comfortable silence, Daniel thought about that first night, the whisper near the fire, the confusion, the embarrassment. He realized how easily he could have reacted defensively. He could have left angry, believing he was misunderstood. Instead, he had stated, "That whisper," he said softly. "It changed everything. It was meant to." "I used to think photography was about showing people things they've never seen," Daniel continued. "Now I think it's about showing respect for what you're allowed to see." "That is a strong lesson," she replied. Later that evening, there was another small gathering. The fire burned warmly, and the sky was full of stars. Daniel stood near the edge of the circle, watching children practice dance steps. The tall warrior approached him quietly. "You are different now," the warrior said. "I hope in a good way," Daniel replied. The warrior nodded. "You learn to listen before looking." "I'm still learning." The warrior's gaze moved toward Ayana, who was speaking with a group of young girls nearby. "Strength does not always shout," the warrior said. "Sometimes it teaches." Daniel understood that he was not only speaking about Ayana. As the night grew darker and the fire burned lower, Daniel did something he had not done on his first visit. He left his camera behind entirely and joined the circle. He did not stand outside it. He did not observe from a distance. He became part of it, not as someone who owned the story, but as someone who respected it. When he eventually returned to the city again, he carried more than photographs. He carried a deeper awareness. In interviews about his work, he spoke openly about that first night. He described how a quiet whisper had stopped him and forced him to question himself. He explained that sometimes the greatest growth begins with discomfort. Years later, Daniel would still remember the firelight reflecting in Ayana's eyes. He would remember the steady presence of the tall warrior. He would remember the drumbeat that once felt like background noise, but had become a heartbeat guiding him toward humility. The words, "Never look at him again," no longer echoed as a warning. They echoed as a reminder that looking without understanding can cause harm. A reminder that silence can be powerful. A reminder that real change begins when someone chooses to stay, listen, and learn. And because one young woman chose to respond with wisdom instead of turning away, a photographer learned that seeing is not about the eyes alone. It is about respect. It is about responsibility. It is about heart.